Hello developers, welcome back to Programming Fields. I'm your host Umesh Rana. Today we are going to explore a very important aspect of web development, that is form validation. So stick around as we explore why it is so important and how Laravel's powerful features make it a bridge. So before we dive into Laravel, let's understand the significance of form validation in web development. It is not just about catching errors, it is about delivering an excellent user experience and maintaining the integrity of your data. Laravel is known as for its elegancy and simplicity. It offers robust features for form validation. In this video, we will take you through a comprehensive journey to master Laravel's form validation capabilities. This video can be lengthy for you, so keep patience because I want to give you in-depth understanding of form validation in Laravel, and that cannot be covered in just 5 to 6 minutes of a single video. So please keep watching. So let's move to the code editor. I have already created a Laravel application. So I have opened the project in VS Code editor, and before starting anything, let me add outline of this video that we are going to cover. So at the very first I will create one basic form, and thereafter I will create a controller, and also for that form I will write some validation rules for validating the form, and then we'll display the error message. All right, and also we will customize the error messages according to input field name. All right, next thing, we will repopulate the form with old values, and at last we will say how we can stop the request to check after first validation failure. So stop of first validation failure. That's it. Okay, so let's start by creating a form. So here, just for simplicity, I have created one form. If you will navigate to the resources inside this views, so inside this views folder I have created a master.blade.php file first. So inside this master blade file, here I have imported this bootstrap snippet, bootstrap css and javascript. All right, and inside this blade file I have created one container, and here I have used this yield directive so that I can pass dynamic content here. All right, so let me save this outline. Okay, now come to this master blade file, and based on this master blade file I have created another blade file inside this auth folder. All right, so here I have created one folder named auth, and inside this auth folder I have created one registration.blade file. All right, and inside this blade file I have created a basic form. Let me just toggle it so you will be able to see. So inside this form I have these fields just like name, email, password, phone number, gender and website. Okay, and at last we have this submit button. So currently I have added this form action as user.store. Okay, but if I will navigate to route folder web.php, here I don't have any route as of now. Okay, so if you run the application and navigate to the browser, then as of now I have this default homepage only. Okay, now come to this code editor, and here in order to handle this form request I need one route. All right, but in order to functioning this form we required one controller. So let me navigate to the terminal, and here I will create one controller using PHP artisan make controller, and here I will provide name as user controller. Okay, so the controller is created. Now come to this app folder inside this HTTP. Now we have this controller as user controller. Okay, so now let's create one function as public function create. Inside this function I will simply return view, and we have this registration.blade file. Okay, so here I will have to write auth.registration because this is inside auth folder. Okay, this is done. Now come to this route web.php file, and here we'll create one route as route : get, and let's say registration. All right, and for the second parameter we will pass array and then controller name as user controller : class, and then we'll call this function name as create. Okay, now this controller should be imported at this top. So simply write use app/http controllers and the controller name as user controller. It's done. Now copy this endpoint, come to the browser and simply navigate to that route. So this is saying user.store method is not defined. Yeah, because in the registration form, we have added this form action as user.store and this endpoint is not defined yet. So let's come to this route and again we will create one endpoint as post because when we'll submit this form, this will have post request. So here we will create one post request as store and simply this will again call this user controller. So here I will create one route group just like route controller. Okay, and here I will provide that controller name as user controller colon class and then we will use group and this closure function. Okay, and inside this closure function I will move these two routes and instead of this user controller simply I will call this create function. Okay, same thing for this post route. So I will create one method as store and here I will just provide named route as user dot store. Okay, so in the previous video we already discussed this controller group routes. Okay, if you are new to this route and controller group, I will provide that video link in this description box. Okay, so this is done. Now inside this controller we need to create one function as store. So come to this controller and just define one function as store and this is our post request. So for capturing the form request we need to define request object like this. Okay, and let me just simply come and die request on. That's it. Now come to this browser, refresh it and here you can see we had this form. Now let me just align this form. Here I will add margin auto class and again a shadow just like this. Just refresh it. Yeah, this is done and also this title should be in center. So here I will just pass text center class. This is done. Yeah, let me just make it small. Heading 4. Yes. So this form is ready. Let me just zoom out. So currently we have added this form action to route that is user.store. All right, if you will see here, this is user.store and this will trigger this store function. So if I will try to submit this form, as of now you can see this is submitted with null values. So we have to prevent this form submission until this is validated. So we will handle this server side form validation in Laravel using Laravel form validation. So Laravel provides form validation rules. So based on that we can validate inputs based on different rules. So as of now we will just validate this form regarding this file and image. We will discuss those things in upcoming videos. So before writing any validation rule, let me quickly navigate to the browser. I will simply open Laravel documentation. So the very first link you will have to open this one. Yeah, and search for validation. So here we can follow this Laravel documentation for creating validation rule. All right, so simply come to this thing and here you will see Laravel provides validation rule just like this. So here this provides validate function. All right, I will simply write $this validate request and the second parameter will be array, and inside this array we will have to pass field name which are created inside this form. So inside this form we have this input type text and that name attribute and this value is name. So for every input we'll have to create this validation rule with the same name. Okay, so let's come to this code again and here we will create the first input as name and I want this as required. Okay, similarly we'll have next field as email. So for email I want like email and this should be required and email should be validated with proper email address. So for that Laravel provides email rule. So it will automatically validate the entered value is email or not. So behind this email validation rule, the Laravel validates if the entered email is in correct format or not. Okay, and now we have this next input field as password and for this password we will create validation rule as password and I want this as required. Okay, let's see the next field we have phone number, gender and website. Let's see this phone number again I want as required. Let me duplicate it, phone number, gender and website. So we can see this regarding this website, this is not mandatory, right? So we cannot write this required attribute as of now. Regarding this website I will just discuss that in just couple of minutes. So let me comment this as of now. So for these 5 inputs I have added required field validation. Now come to the browser, simply refresh this application and now try to submit. So you can see the form is not submitting, right? That means this validation rule is preventing this form to be submitted. Okay, so as of now we have created this validation rule, and this validation rule is not allowing us to submit this form, right? But here we cannot see any error message, like what kind of errors are there and why this form is not submitting. So next we have to capture this error message from this form validation rules. Okay, so here we will display the error messages. Okay, so let's come to the blade file, and let's start from here. Just below this input field, Laravel provides error directive to capture the validation error message. So this error directive will basically connect with name attribute. For that we have created this validation rule. Okay, so simply you will have to write @error, and there will be an error block. Inside this error directive function, you will have to pass name for the input field for which you have created validation rule. So for this input field we have name as name, and inside this I will create one key tag class text danger, and inside this I will simply print message. Okay, and similarly you will have to copy this for all inputs, just like this, and here we'll replace with email. Next thing for password, so we'll replace with this password. Phone number we have given this name as phone number. Okay? And next we have this dropdown gender, we'll pass gender. Regarding this website, I have not created any validation rule as of now, so this is fine. Now let's come to the browser, refresh it. Now let's try to submit. So now you can see this triggered validation error message. For every validation rules, this triggered error message. So as of now, I have just created required validation for every input. Just like name is required, email is required, password is required, gender is required. Alright. But now if you want to create advanced validation, just like name should be proper name, alphabet characters with space, and this should be minimum of 3 and maximum of 50 characters. Also, like password should be required, and it should be alphanumeric mixed with some special characters, right? This phone number should allow numbers only, and it should be maximum 10 digits. All right. So in order to validate all these inputs in a specific way with a specific validation rules, Laravel provides different set of rules for checking everything. Just like if we want name to be allowed in characters only with some specific minimum and maximum characters, then Laravel provides that validation rules. Simply we can check out this Laravel official website again. And here if we'll scroll down, then you can see here available validation rules. Okay, if we'll click this, you can see these available validation rules can be applied for input based on the requirement. Okay, so as of now we have used this required. If the value is null, then this required field validation will be triggered. Okay, similarly belonging to required, there are another set of rules like required if. This will be basically conditional thing. When if you want to set required attribute depending on other field values, then we can use this. So you can check out this documentation properly. As of now we'll complete this form validation. So here I will just write minimum. Here you can see we will have this mean attribute in the available validation rule. Here you can see mean. Also there will be max, just like mean, max, email, just like we used this email to validate this email field. Also for website URL related thing, there is URL validation rule. Okay, so let's apply some more validation rules here. Just like I want name to be minimum 3 and maximum to be 50 characters or 20 characters. Okay, and regarding this email, this is correct. This email will validate this proper email format. Now let's come to this password. So regarding this password, I just want minimum to be 5 and max it should be 20 max. Okay, regarding this phone number, I want this required, and along with this I want this in the digits. So I want the phone number maximum should be 10 digits and minimum it should be 10 digits. Okay, and the next we have gender. So regarding this gender field, it should be alpha only. Okay, yeah, so these rules are defined. Now let's come to the browser, switch back to application. Again, if I will refresh and submit it, then you can see this triggered the validation error. So here you can see this is triggering the default validation error message for every inputs. Just like regarding this name, this triggered name field is required. So these are the default validation error messages coming from Laravel. So this automatically detects based on this input name, and this triggers this validation error message. Regarding this name, it generated name field is required. Regarding email, it generated email field is required. So now let's see how we can customize this error message according to our need. Okay, so let's come to this code. So now inside this form validation request, we will pass the second argument as a customized message. So the second argument will be added in the form of array, just like this validation rules. So the very first we have name input field. So for that we will add, just like in the array, so we will add name dot required, and here we will pass required message. Please enter the name. Now we will add next message. Now we will add next message for mean. It's like the name must be at least 3 chars. Okay, and similarly for max, we'll have to provide name must not be more than 20 characters. Okay, now let's come to the browser to see the result. If I will refresh it, let me submit, you can see this triggered customize error message. Please enter the name. Now let me try to submit with 2 characters. Then this triggered the second validation error message. The name must be at least 3 characters. Now let me submit more than 20 characters here. I will submit. Then this triggered the third validation rule for this name as max attribute. Okay, so let me customize all the error messages regarding these all input fields. Okay, so similarly I will just copy paste it, and here this will be email dot required. Please enter the email. Again we will have email dot email, because we want email to be validated in the proper format. So I will write the email must be a valid email address. Now regarding this password dot required, we will have, please enter the password. Password dot mean must be at least 5 chars. Password dot max, password must not be more than 20 characters. And similarly for the phone number, we need it, and regarding this phone number we will write simply please enter the phone number. And also for this digits validation, we will have to write phone number dot digits. Okay, and here let's customize this message. Phone number must be 10 digits. Okay, and at last we have this gender. So as of now, let's write required, and this will be please select gender. Okay, so now let's save it, come to this browser, refresh it. Now let's try to submit. So here we have the customized error messages. Okay, so now let's try to submit this form, just like Umesh. Okay, if I will submit this, then you can see we have another issue here. When we submitted this form, the entered value is vanished. Why? Because this form submitted this request to the server, and this form is completely refreshed. Okay, so this will happen every time, like if you will try to submit anything here. Okay, then you can see this validation is gone, but also along with this validation error, this cleared out this entire form. So in the next step, we have to repopulate this form with the old values. So here old value refers whatever we will enter here, those values should be written on the form submit. So the entered value should be written in the form on the form submit. Okay, so Laravel provides one attribute named old. So we have to define that inside this form. So regarding every input, we have to create value attribute, just like value, and inside this value we'll have to use old function. So this old function will retain the value based on the input name. Regarding this particular input, we have the name attribute as name, so we have to pass that as name, just like this. Now let's come to the browser, refresh it. So here we have triggered this validation. Now let's try to submit this form. Yeah, so you can see this entered value is populated on the form. Okay, so similarly we will have to write same thing for all these inputs. So simply copy this and paste it here, and let's change this name as email, password So regarding this password, this attribute won't work. That we will discuss in the upcoming videos. I'll simply add this for phone number. And yes, regarding gender, it won't work like old attribute because this is drop down for this gender. So here we'll have to check if the old value is male or female, then based on that we will have to make it selected. Okay, just like we will use old, and here we will pass gender equals male, then we will write selected, else empty. Similarly, just copy it and add it here just for female. Yeah, because we have this value as male and female. All right, and regarding this website, we have not added any validation rule as of now. So let's come to the browser, refresh it, and let me try to submit as name. Okay, and some password, phone number, just like this, gender is male. Okay, now let's submit this. So here this phone number is exceeded. Now let's submit it again. Yeah, so all these fields are submitted and these values are populated on the form again, except this password. Okay, you can see here this password is not populated again on every submit. If I will enter and if I will submit it, then here this is not returned. So behind this every submit, Laravel generates one session. So on submit, Laravel just flash session based on the submitted values. On capturing these values, we basically capture from this session. Okay, so here the password is sensitive information, that's why Laravel security system does not populate this password field. Okay, now I will show you that functionality is already added in the Laravel. So come to this code editor, and if you will search for exception handler, so this is available inside app exception folder. All right, if you navigate to app exceptions, so inside this exception there is one handler.php file, and inside this you can see there is one array that is don't flash, and inside this array we have this password field by default defined. So we can see this is current password, password confirmation. So these three attributes are defined based on the input name. So here we have defined input type password and name is password. Okay, now let's try to change this name as password new. Okay, now let's check it. So come to this controller, and here we will just change this validation rule password. Okay, so we have changed this validation rule, and also we'll need to change that in old value inside this blade file. So let's change this to old, and also for this error message, let's save it, come to this browser, refresh it, and let's try to submit. Okay, so let's test for this password filter now. If I will submit it, you can see this password is populated now. Okay, so behind this password protection, Laravel handles this using this don't flash array. So this don't flash array will not return these particular named attribute defined for the input fields. I hope this will make sense for you. Okay, so now let's revert these things again, because I want this to keep as password, and the same thing for this controller as well. Yeah, this is done. Okay, let's submit this again. Okay, and password 5. Okay, phone number, let's add digits, and gender is male, and again we'll enter some password, and yeah, this form is submitted. Now we will define some more validation rules regarding this website. Regarding this website validation, I want this by default empty, means by default it won't ask for required attribute. By default this won't be required, but when I enter something, it should validate a correct URL. Okay, so let's add that validation. So Laravel provides another validation rule that calls sometimes. Okay, so here if you will type sometimes, then inside this we will add this validation rule. So come to this code editor, and here regarding this website we will add sometimes, and by default we want this as nullable, but when we enter something, that should validate a valid URL. So for that, Laravel provides URL validation rule. So this will check if the entered string is URL or not. And according to this website validation rule, we have to customize the error message just like website dot URL. So whenever something will be typed, that will trigger this error message. Please enter a valid website URL. That's it. Just save it. Now let's come to the blade file in order to display this validation error message for website. Okay, so come to this registration blade file, and here we will simply copy and paste it, and then we will change this to website. That's it. Now let's come to the browser, refresh this application, and now let's submit it. So here let's start typing something, and if we'll submit, you can see this triggered this validation error message, like the entered value should be correct website URL. So now let's type something just like https programmingfirst.com. If I will submit, you can see this accepted the entered value. So now similarly we will have to populate this website URL in the form. So for that, again we will use this value as old website. Yeah, that's done. Now let's refresh it again, and let me submit it something test. Yeah, this value is written on the form. So this is done. So regarding the validation rules, you can pass JavaScript regular expression as well for specific and advanced validation rules. In order to do that, here you can pass regex as well. So let's suppose if I want this name characters to be specific characters and a space allowed, then let's write some regular expression as regex, and here we'll have to define that pattern. So the pattern will be just like slash, just I want to allow alphabet like A to Z and a small a to Z along with a space. Okay, now let's come to the browser. If I will refresh it, let's submit. So I want name to be written in correct valid format, and if I will enter any numeric value, then it won't allow. It triggered this name field format is invalid, and this is captured using this regex. Okay, so for this customized error message, simply we can define one custom error message as name.regex, as the name must be a valid name. Yeah, so now let's save it and refresh this form. Okay, now let's try to submit numeric field. You can see this triggered the name must be a valid name. So using this way, you can validate your form in more advanced in a specific thing. Yeah, so this is done. Now we will discuss one more important thing. So Laravel provides one more important property, like if we want to prevent the next set of validation rules in one row, then Laravel provides another form validation rule attribute that is called bail in this Laravel documentation. And let's search for bail. So here if you will see, if you will read this documentation, this is clearly written here. Sometimes you may wish to stop running validation rules on an attribute after the first validation failure. So in our case, for this name attribute, we have added multiple validation rules. For example, here you can see this is required, mean, max, and also regular expression. So what if I want, just like after failure of the first validation rule, it won't trigger the second, third, or fourth, any of these. In order to do that, I will simply add this bail validation rule. Okay, so let's save it, come to this application and refresh it. Now let's submit this form. Yeah, and here let's suppose I have entered 2 characters this name, and if I will submit this, then this triggered this, the name must be at least 3 characters. Okay, now if I will add any numeric value here, okay, now if I will submit it, then you can see this said this name must be a valid name, so it won't trigger the next validation rule if the first validation is failed. In the next upcoming videos, we will see more advanced validation rule by creating a separate request in Laravel, so that if you will be working on any large project, then in that case writing validation rule in the controller function will be little bit messy. So to avoid those code redundancy, what we will do, we will create separate request, and inside that request we will define validation rule and we will customize those messages so that this code can be reusable for us. So thank you for joining us today. I hope this video provide you in-depth understanding of Laravel form handling and validation. So stay tuned for more exciting content, and until next time, happy coding.